The reality was that abuse, which for anyone else would be exceptional, had become normalised for this little girl. She had known nothing else for much of her life. You, Irfan Sharif and Benash Batul, had persuaded her that she deserved the treatment that you meted out to her. The marks were consistent with restraints being used, in other words, with Sara being tied up. Many of these injuries had tramline markings, which show that she had been beaten with an elongated object. You, Irfan Sharif, have admitted to beating Sara on a number of occasions with a metal pole, part of a high chair. The pole was found at the property after Sara's death. You also admitted to beating Sara with a cricket bat, which was also found at the property. At one stage you admitted to doing this multiple times, but then you changed your evidence and would only admit to doing so once. I have no doubt that in fact this was a regular occurrence, at least towards the end. You also admitted to hitting her on the head with a mobile phone. In addition to the 71 fresh injuries, the medical experts found a total of 25 separate fractures to the bones in Sara's body. These included a fractured collarbone, 2 fractured shoulder blades, fractured ribs, a fractured humerus, 11 separate fractures to her spinal column, and fractures to bones in both of her hands. The medical evidence stated that many of these injuries were highly unusual in a child. They went beyond what would be seen in sporting injuries and were of a severity that is rare even in road traffic accidents. They would have required multiple episodes of violence, each involving a substantial degree of force. These fractures were dated variously between 8 weeks before death and 2 weeks or so before death. This is not a case of a single episode of maltreatment, therefore. This poor child was battered with great force again and again. Some of the injuries require special mention because they demonstrate the almost unbelievable torture to which Sara was subjected in the last weeks of her life. The medical experts identified a fracture in the hyoid bone in Sara's neck. This is a very unusual injury and was the result of very vigorous and energetic manual strangulation, quite possibly on more than one different occasion. Sara sustained a serious brain injury a few days before she died as the result of a blow to her head. I have no doubt that you, Irfan Sharif, were responsible for these injuries. In addition, she had 2 open burn wounds on her buttocks. These were in the shape of the sole plate of an iron and matched the iron that was found in the house. These wounds had undoubtedly been caused by Sara's buttocks being pressed for several seconds against the hot plate of the iron, no doubt as a punishment. This would have required 2 people to carry out, one to hold Sara down and the other to press Sara against the iron. I am sure that you, Irfan Sharif, and you, Benash Batul, jointly inflicted this injury. One of the most disturbing features of this whole case is that the burns expert, Dr. Martin, said that this injury was sustained at least 2 weeks and more likely 2 to 6 weeks before death. He said that it would have been very painful. So, Sara had this terrible wound in her buttocks for a number of weeks before she died, but nobody had properly treated it or sought medical help for her. Had she lived, it would have caused permanent disfigurement. In addition, when she died, Sara had open burn wounds on the bones of the inside of each ankle. The only possible explanation for this, as is made clear by the medical evidence, is that Sara's ankles were tied and then either her feet were wrapped around a hot pipe or, more likely, boiling water was poured on her ankles. Once again, the wounds had not been treated and no medical help had been sought for Sara. The post-mortem investigation showed that Sara had 6 bite marks on her body. 5 of them were on her left arm and 1 was on the inside of her left thigh. The marks were made by an adult. you, Irfan Sharif and Faisal Malik, and Sara's older brother, each provided teeth impressions, and each was excluded from being responsible for the tooth marks. You, Benash Batul, declined to give a tooth impression, and the only possible inference is that it was you who made these bite marks. Though the bite marks were not in themselves fatal injuries, the fact that you were prepared to assault Sara in this way provides an insight into the extent to which you were complicit in and comfortable with the abuse that Sara was suffering. But the medical and forensic evidence does not stop there. It is absolutely clear that in the last few weeks of her life, Sara was tied up. She was trussed up with masking tape and with skipping rope. Even worse, she was hooded. Plastic bags were put over her head, which were then held in place with masking tape, and a hole was ripped in the plastic bag through which she could breathe. Sara's DNA and hair were found on the masking tape and in one of the hoods. This treatment of a 10-year-old child is nothing short of gruesome. It is hard to imagine how terrifying it must have been for Sara, especially as the treatment was at the hands of her own parents. It gets worse. When the bins at the house were examined after Sara's death, the police found a soiled nappy wrapped around Sara's leggings. It is clear that you, Irfan Sharif and Benash Batul, were putting Sara in pull-up nappies because she was unable to go to the toilet while she was trussed up. There was medical evidence that you would then let her stew in her own urine and faeces. Dr. Martin said that the injuries to Sara's ankles appeared to have been made worse by the fact that her ankles had been in contact with urine and faeces. This also means that the restraints were so tight that Sara's feet and ankles were pulled up so that they were in contact with her bottom. I have no doubt, in light of the evidence, that Sara will have been left trussed up for considerable periods of time, including when Irfan Sharif was out of the house, when Benash Batul and Faisal Malik were the only adults in the house. I have no doubt, therefore, that you, Irfan Sharif and Benash Batul, were jointly responsible for tying Sara up in this way, though I am sure that the idea would have been Irfan Sharif's. The medical evidence also shows that at the time of death, Sara was underweight and undernourished. The pathologist who carried out Sara's post-mortem examination, Dr. Carey, described the cause of Sara's death as being complications arising from multiple injuries and neglect. He said that the cause of death was not specific to a single injury or incident, but that the injury she had suffered cumulatively caused Sara's death. I have no doubt that Dr. Carey is right about this. I therefore reject the contention put forward at trial by the defence teams that Sara's death was solely caused by the brain injury that she suffered a few days before her death. That may well have been the last straw, but the constellation of injuries that Sara suffered over many weeks each made a significant contribution to Sara's death. This includes the burns to which you, Benash Batul, directly contributed, Irfan Sharif and Benash Batul. I cannot be sure that you played any active part in the ill treatment of Sara. Indeed, I do not believe that you did. There was no evidence at trial that you had done so. I have summarised the relevant facts earlier in these sentencing remarks. You came into the family home in December 2022, some 8 months before Sara's death. You were not present when the campaign of ill treatment began. Once you took up residence in the family home, you spent much of your time there, especially during the university vacation that began in May 2023. This was the period of the worst of the torture that Sara endured. You cannot fail to have been aware of much of the terrible ill treatment to which Sara was being regularly subjected, including beatings, burnings, and the tying up and hooding of Sara with tape and plastic bags. You stood by and did nothing. I have no doubt that your offending falls within category 1A, very high culpability in the relevant sentencing guideline. Very high culpability is indicated by the extreme character of one or more of the culpability B factors and or by the presence of a combination of culpability B factors. One of the culpability B factors is failure to take any steps to protect the victim from offences in which other specific culpability B factors are present. This failure was extreme. Your failure was a failure to protect Sara from offences in which almost every single one of the other specific culpability B factors was present. You failed to protect Sara from prolonged and multiple incidents of serious cruelty and serious neglect. You failed to protect her from gratuitous degradation consisting of the restraints and hooding. You failed to protect her from the use of very significant force involving the use of weapons, namely the cricket bat, the pole, the iron and hot water. You took absolutely no steps to protect Sara. The starting point for a Category 1A offence is 14 years custody, and the range is from 12 to 18 years custody. In your case, the aggravating factors are these. First, the prolonged and exceptional suffering endured by Sara prior to her death. Once again, I bear in mind the need to avoid double counting. Second, the offences were committed in the presence of other children. Third, failure to seek medical help. Fourth, you paid for the flights to Pakistan and helped the family to flee, fleeing yourself. Fifth, you disposed of important evidence in the form of your mobile phone. And sixth, you have shown no remorse. The mitigation is very limited in your case. You were 28 years old at the time of Sara's death. You were a graduate student. Although you had only recently arrived in the UK and you were living in your brother's home, there was nothing to stop you from notifying the police of Sara's treatment. You hardly knew Sara Sharif, and the respect you may have thought was due to your older brother was no excuse to failing to call him and his wife out in their behaviour. There is no suggestion that he bullied or threatened you. You knew the difference between right and wrong. You were not forced to stand by while Sara was treated in this way. I bear in mind that you are of previous good character. You returned voluntarily to the United Kingdom in September 2023, but as I have said, this was not done out of a desire to own up to your offending. Rather, it was the result of pressure from your family in Pakistan. I also bear in mind that much of the abuse of Sara took place before you arrived in the UK. I must consider whether you meet the criteria for dangerousness as laid down in the Sentencing Act. If so, I would have to consider whether to impose a life sentence or an extended sentence of imprisonment upon you. An offender is dangerousness if there is a significant risk to members of the public of serious harm occasioned by the commission by the offender of further specified offences as defined. I have considered this matter carefully. Notwithstanding the truly horrific nature of the treatment suffered by Sara, I have concluded that you do not meet the criteria for dangerousness. There is nothing in your earlier life to suggest that you're a dangerous offender. You are not the prime mover in the ill treatment of Sara. As I have said, there was no evidence that you took any active part in the torture of Sara. Your role in these horrific events was limited to standing by and failing to take any action to prevent them. I now come to the sentences. Sara Sharif, Benesh Batul and Faisal Malik, stand up. Sara Sharif, for the murder of Sara Sharif, I sentence you to imprisonment for life. Taking account of all the relevant circumstances and the aggravating mitigating factors that I have set out, the minimum term will be 40 years. Benash Batul, for the murder of Sara Sharif, I sentence you to imprisonment for life. Taking account of all the relevant circumstances and the aggravating and mitigating factors that I have set out, the minimum term will be 33 years, less the time that you have spent on remand. For the offence of causing or allowing the death of Sara Sharif, I sentence you to imprisonment for 16 years, less the time that you have served on remand. You will serve up to 2/3 of your sentence in custody. You will serve the remainder on licence. You must keep to the terms of your licence and commit no further offence, or you will be liable to be recalled, and you may then serve the rest of your sentence in custody. You may take them down.